Today I will show you the difference between opacity and the flow in Photoshop, so let's start. Hey guys, it's Nemanja and welcome to another really fun episode. Today I will show you the basic difference between the opacity and the flow, and after that I will show you a little bit more in depth how the flow works and how the opacity works for all you guys who want to know a little bit more about that. So without further ado, let's the fun begin. Alright guys, today we will use this mouse trap escape, one of my creations, just to show you on that how the opacity and flows works. And here, if you set the brush tool, press B on the keyboard, go here and press on the brush tool here, you can see the opacity and the flow options here. You can change both opacity and the flow by going on this slider here and change the value, or you can go on the letters here and just move left and right to set the opacity. Or the third way, how I prefer it, is to use a keyboard shortcuts. Use the numbers from 1 to 0 to set the opacity. For example, if you want opacity to 50%, just press 5 on the keyboard. If you want 75%, you press 7 and 5. 100% is 0. And if you want to set value below the 10, you need first to press 0, then desired number. For example, 3%, it will be 03, like 03, and this is 3%. With the opacity, with the flow, it's completely the same procedure, but you need to press and hold shift while pressing the numbers. So 50% flow, it's shift 5, 70% flow, it's shift 7, and so on and so on. Alright guys, now let me show you how this works. If I have opacity set to 100% and flow to 100%, let's create a new empty layer and choose some color, maybe some orange color, why not? And paint across those two models. You will see that this paint, the color will cover models completely. They are not visible through the color because this color is 100% opaque. If I undo this and set the opacity to 50% and paint across the models, you will see that you can see through the color because the color is 50% opaque or 50% transparent, depend how you want to look at it. And no matter how many times I paint across the same surface, the same color without releasing the mouse button, that's really important, without releasing the mouse button, it will stay 50% opaque. And if I want to build up this effect, I need to release the mouse button and paint again over the top of this model, those two models actually. And if I want to build it even more, to make it even more opaque, again, release the mouse button, paint across. Release the mouse button, paint across, and you need to do that as many times as it's necessary to get the desired result. For example, I want to cover her 100%. So I need to release the mouse button and paint over and over and over until I get to that effect. So this is how opacity works. Let's delete this. Okay, and now let me show you how the flow works. Basically, it works exactly the same as the opacity, with that difference that the flow will build up this effect automatically without releasing the mouse button. Let me show you that. If we set the flow to maybe 10% and opacity to 100%, if I go across those two models, they will still be visible. But if I go with the brush without releasing the mouse button, again across the same surface, the effect will automatically start to build up until we get the desired threshold. In this case, the threshold is 100% opacity. So we can paint across this until we are satisfied with the result. So this is the basic difference with the flow and the opacity. Flow will automatically build up this effect, and opacity you need to release the mouse button, paint over again. Release the mouse button, paint over again. Alright, now let's go a little bit more in depth how both of those options works. If I set the opacity to 50% and the flow back to 100% and create a line here, really fat line, you will see that this line is 50% opaque. And if I go with the same settings across this line again, you will maybe assume that I will get 100% opaque color, but not. I will get only 75% opaque color because this works a little bit more different. So if I go again across this line, I will get this, that it's less than 50%, and actually this is exactly 75%. How I know it? Well, I will explain you really quickly. Let's undo one time, and we have again 50% opacity line. Now I will paint with 50% opacity, and 50% opacity of 50% opacity is 25% opacity. So that means that I will paint on the top of this line with only 25% opacity. And 25 plus this 50, it's 75. It's a little bit crazy, but it works like this. So if I paint across this, I will get 75% opacity line. If you don't trust me, let's set this to 75 and create another line here. As you can see, if I rotate it, maybe it's easier for you to see, I have two identical line in a matter of opacity, okay? And let's go back and so on and so on. If I paint it again, I will paint again with 50% of this 25% of opacity, actually 25% that it's left from opacity, and this is 12.5, so I will get 82.5% opaque line, and so on and so on. That's how the opacity works. That's why when you paint across, let's create a new layer here with 50% once, and then again you will not get 100% opacity. You will build up this effect in lower increments. Right now, let me show you how the flow works a little bit more in depth. If you remember from the beginning, the flow, it's completely exactly the same as the opacity, with that difference that the flow will automatically build this effect as you will use opacity, paint, release, paint, release, paint, release, and you will get the same effect. Let me show you that really quickly. If I set the flow to 50% and paint across this, you will see something very strange. This is not 50% opaque, but it should be 50% opaque. It's almost 100% opaque. Why is that? Let's go back to opacity, put the flow to 100 and opacity to 50%, and let me show you how the flow works. Flow works like this. Click once, then release mouse button, click one more, release one mouse button, and like that it's building the effect. And because there is really small spacing between those brush circles, strokes, you will see basically 100% opacity of the brush here, brush color, when the flow is set to 50. Okay, let's go. I hope that you understand that. If not, I will show again. Let's go back to the flow and set the flow to 50% and paint. See, one, it will build, it will build, it will build. That effect as the same as I did few seconds ago with the opacity. So if you want to paint with the flow, you need to lower the effect even more, like this, and then you will get this nice result. If I set the flow to 50%, go to brush properties and increase this spacing between those circles, you will see how the flow works, right? It is 50% opacity, but because overlapping really fast, it will really fast get to that value of 100% opacity. Alright guys, we are finished with the boring part, how the opacity and the flow works a little bit more in depth for you guys who want to know that. And now I will show you how to combine both of those settings to get really nice result. We can set the opacity maybe to 30% and then set the flow to 10%. That means that we will build our color in increments of 10%, but when it reaches the threshold of 30%, the effect will stop. So we cannot build our color more than 30% opacity. It looks like this. We can start slowly, and then when it's reached the 30% opacity of the color, it will stop. We can go over this as many times as we want, but it will not go more than 30%. If we set the opacity to 60%, we will build this effect with the increments of 10%, and when it reaches 60% opacity, it will stop. It will not do it anything more than 60% opacity. You can use the same thing to maybe dodge and burn. Let's use curves to dodge something. Let's make it brighter, invert the mask. And now I will use white color. I will use opacity all the way to 100%. And I will use really low value of flow, maybe even 1%. And now I can start dodging this without releasing the mouse. This is really nice. And maybe this arm here. This is really nice and useful. And sometimes it's much easier for me to dodge and burn like this with the flow, then with the opacity to always go release, click release, and so on and so on. But sometimes I really want to use only opacity because I want to have 100% control over one stroke. So this is really important. You need to combine between those two options depending on the situation. Alright guys, that's it for today. I really hope that you liked this tutorial and that you learned something new out of it. As you already saw, the difference between the opacity and the flow, it's not so big. It's only in that part where the flow will build up the effect automatically. But sometimes in some situations that difference can be a huge time saver. You can use exactly the same principles for the clone stamp tool because the clone stamp tool has both flow and the opacity. So practice, experiment, have fun, try it on few different situations and you will master it. You will know when to use flow, when to use the opacity, when to use combination of both. Alright guys, if you have any questions regarding to this episode, please leave them in the comments below. I will be glad to answer them. If you want to support me on this channel to make it even bigger and better, you can do it by visiting my Patreon page. The link is down there in the description, and of course you will get some things in return. Alright guys, subscribe if you're not already, ring that bell to get notified about the future episodes, and see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.